Welcome back to Burning the Ships Podcast Solo Show, the show where we go all in on business, health, family, and life without looking back. These solo episodes are designed to give you tactical strategies you can apply right away, followed by a mindset principle to help you anchor those strategies and execute with confidence. From time to time, I'll also bring in experts to dive deeper into specific areas so you're getting actionable tools and perspectives from all angles. This show is also brought to you by 608B Capital. At 608B, we provide short-term real estate loans for investors who need speed, certainty, and flexibility to scale their business. Whether it's a fix and flip or a buy and hold, our team understands the borrower side because we've been there and continue to be there ourselves. To learn more, visit 608bcapital.com. Now let's dive in. Welcome back to Burning the Ship solo episode, and today we are kicking off a new style with these solo episodes. I talked about it last week for those that listened in last week's episode, but I talked about how we're going to kind of move away from the weekly ramble episodes, and I may come back and sprinkle a few of those in here and there if I'm inspired to do so. But we're going to move more into these solo episodes being more tactical in nature. So what I mean by that is more focused on like ideas and strategies around real estate, business. It could be health and fitness. It could be a variety of different topics that I normally just ramble on, like mindset topics and stuff like that. But this is going to be more structured and very clear and concise around certain ideas. And like, for example, this week, I'm going to be talking about underwriting a single family home for fix and flip. So I'm going to walk through step-by-step process based on how we do things and how we approach it. When I say we, I'm talking about us and our business for 608B Capital and our fund as well, because we use pretty much the same underwriting principles. So I'm going to walk you through from like start to finish. I'll cover some terminology, stuff like that. So with that, I'll be this will be this week, and then to follow that up, I'll transition every week into kind of a mindset topic that ties into whatever tactical topic that I'm talking about. So that is going to kind of be the new flow of these solo episodes. They're not going to be for everybody because, some people in the audience are masters at flipping homes or may not have a bit of interest in that. But I assure you that even if you fall in one of those categories, the mindset segment at the end will be more than just tying it into that particular topic. It will be talking about in life in general. So I'll kind of spoil it now, but the mindset nugget today is going to be discipline. So to be a good underwriter of deals, you got to be disciplined with that underwriting, and then I'll tie that into some just a bigger perspective around life and other things. Before we get into any of that, I'm going to turn it over to my man, JJ, for JJ's Joke of the Week. Take it away, JJ.
What do you call a sleeping bull? A bulldozer.
All right, buddy. Good job. That's another good one. I love turning it over to him, letting him do that, and we've had a lot of fun with it. He couldn't care less about this podcast, but now that he's a part of it, every week he asked me to put it on YouTube so he can see him telling his joke of the week. So we've had a little bit of fun with that. So now we're going to kick off, like I said, new style. We'll roll with it. Now, you guys that have listened for a long time, you kind of have, you've got hours of insight into how my brain works. And I think in pop-ups. So as I'm talking about a topic, I might be thinking about 3 other topics. And as they pop up in my brain, I go down tangents and all. And that's fun for me, right? I've always been like that. But it can be a little chaotic for people trying to follow whatever it is I'm talking about, right? So the weekly rambles tend to get that way, kind of go all over the place. Oftentimes I catch myself 30 minutes into them and realize I hadn't even talked about the main topic that I introduced in the beginning of the episode. So this new style is going to, like I said, I may do some of that because, I like talking that way, but this new style I think is going to be more impactful and helpful to folks that are looking to get not just mindset uh, takeaways, but if they're specifically interested in whatever topic I'm talking about that day. So for example, this episode on underwriting a single family deal, it will sit in our library of podcasts for years and years and years. And so if somebody stumbles across it, 5 years from now and they're thinking about getting into fixing and flipping, it's a good starting resource just to give them the basics of how to get started, how to underwrite a deal and things like that. Now things could change, numbers could change, percentages, but when it comes to house flipping, the I guess the overall principles and like foundation of how to underwrite a deal have been pretty much consistent for since house flipping's been around, or any type of flipping, right? You could flip a lot, we're talking about houses today. You can flip anything. You can flip cars. A lot of people do that. They'll buy a car that, needs a lot of work done. They get it at a discount. They do that work and then they sell it to somebody for a profit. You can flip anything like that. But we're going to be talking about houses. So I think this will be a practical episode that people can refer back to or share with folks in their network that might have an interest in things like this. So, like I said, it's going to be a new format, new style. And today will be single family underwriting for fix and flip. So, and again, after I break all that down, we'll tie it into our mindset nugget. So, the goal, that is the first thing you need to define when you're thinking about fix and flip, right? So, what is your goal with it? So, most folks, the goal is pretty simple, right? I want to buy something below market value, meaning the price that I pay for it is below what the actual value is. So how do you find these? And I'll do, other episodes on like diving into how to source deals, how to find them. But basically you're trying to find opportunities where houses are maybe in distress, or could be a house that somebody's inherited and they just don't want anything to do with it and they just want the quick cash and to move on. So it could be a variety of different ways that you can find them, but the goal is to find these properties under market value. And then you come in and we call it forcing appreciation. So you force appreciation. Another term for that is, just simply increasing the value by doing work to it, right? So by renovating it, maybe it needs a new roof, maybe it needs new HVAC, flooring, paint, you name it. And you see that the opportunity is there to provide those things to that property in order to increase value. So if you buy it below market value, you renovate it, and then you're going to sell it at the new market value. So, and the goal is to do that at a profit, right? So you got to define what your profit goal is and what, overall what you're looking to achieve with this. But the main goal in defining that is I'm going to find a property below market value. I'm going to buy that property. I'm going to renovate that property. I'm going to sell that property for a profit. That's the definition of a fix and flip. So there's several like acronyms and terminologies that are used in the fix and flip world, and just real estate in general. But I'm going to go through these real quick. I'm not going to dive too deep into any given one. I'll encourage all of you, like you can go down the rabbit hole of researching these further, but I do want to at least define what they are. So here are some common ones that you'll hear. Number one is going to be ARV. That is a term that I say every day when we're underwriting deals. And the ARV is the after repair value. So remember, your goal is to buy this thing under market value, fix it up, and you hope to sell it for a higher value at the end. Well, there's no way to know what it's going to sell for at the end exactly. You'll never know that number exactly. But you have to, part of the underwriting process is to be able to know what that ARV, the after repair value, is projected to be. So then you can back into all of your other numbers and know what to offer on this deal or what to pay for this deal. So after repair value is ARV. You'll hear that thrown around a lot. And I'll dive into that when we go through an example here in a little bit. So another one is that you'll hear is MAO, maximum allowable offer, right? So after you do all your numbers, you determine ARV, you figure out how much it's going to cost to renovate it, you figure out all the other things that are going to be involved, all the other costs and expenses. You're going to back into a final number that is the max that you can pay for this house, right? That's a very important number. We'll talk about discipline in a little bit, but the importance of that number is if you go over it, then you're increasing the risk that this deal now isn't going to be profitable, right? So you want your MAO, your max allowable offer, to be at a point where you'll never be 100%, because if it were 100%, everybody would do it, right? There are always going to be risk involved, but where you're fairly certain that at this max allowable offer that it's going to be very difficult for this deal to go south, right? For you to lose money in the deal. So the way, and I'll get into this now because we have a very simple formula. Now there's a lot more, it gets pretty nuanced, and I'll go into a little bit of that nuance, but at a high level, like we call it back-of-the-napkin math, right? So when we're looking at a deal, these are the things we're going to look at to underwrite it and determine our max allowable offer very quickly. So those things, the formula is going to be your ARV. So let's say we project that house to, once it's all fixed up, to sell for $300,000. Then we're going to multiply that by, we're going to take 70% of that, right? So 70% is going to be $210,000, right? So the 70% number, the reason we use that is that allows us to, you're buying it 30%, or you're using that number, which is 30% lower than the ARV. So that is building in, buying it at a discount. You're trying to buy it below market value. So, or below, you're trying to get a discount on it. So ARV, 300,000, 70% is 210,000. And then you're going to subtract out your repairs. So this is going to be your renovation cost. So once you subtract that out, it's going to leave you with a final number. Now, there's a couple other metrics that go into this, but at a high level, I'm just going to give you this formula. ARV times 70% minus your renovation cost. That is your max allowable offer. Now, again, I'll talk in a little bit about some other things that you need to consider when coming up with that max allowable offer, but that's a good starting point. So, from there, you need to, and the other variables that come in to play here are going to be your closing cost, your holding cost, and part of that is, like on the closing side, there's front end closing cost and then there's back end closing cost. Front end meaning when you purchase the property, back end meaning when you sell it. So these can vary. So I'm gonna, when I give an example here in a little bit, I'm gonna walk through a deal example here in a few minutes. But the cost can vary quite a bit depending on several things. But in general, when you buy the property, you're gonna have to pay your cost to attorneys to do title work, to do all the things involved with getting this property to a point where you can close on it. And that can range from, depending on the attorneys you work with and what all needs to be done, it could be anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000. Okay. Sometimes you may have to pay the seller's closing cost, right? So like part of your negotiation might be, we'll cover all closing costs, seller and buyer side. So if that is the case, you got to work those numbers in as well. But just that is the front end closing cost. Then you got holding cost. And this is something, there's two things that a lot of people that jump into fix and flip, that they miss, and it can seriously kill a deal and they don't even know it until they've bought the property or they haven't considered it. So I'm going to get into a couple of those right now. So on the surface, this is what a lot of people do. They'll see a property that is, they think they could sell it when it's all fixed up for $300,000. Okay. They think it's going to need $50,000 to get it to that point where it can sell for that. And they can buy it for $100,000. Okay. So that's their max allowable offer. So they do that quick number. $300,000 I can sell it for. It's going to cost me $50,000 to fix up. And I'm going to buy it for $100,000. So now they're $150,000. Excuse me. They can sell it for $300,000. Okay. It's going to cost $50,000 to repair it. Okay. And they're looking at, they look at it as, if I pay $200,000 for this house, not $100,000, I have my math wrong. If they pay $200,000 for this house, then, and it costs them $50,000 to fix it up, they can make $50,000 profit. Right. So that sounds correct. If you think about it, I can buy it for $200,000. I can put $50,000 in it. I can sell it for $300,000. They make $50,000 profit. Well, that's that math. What they miss are two very important things. Well, three really. The closing cost, but then the holding cost. So let's say it takes 6 months from the time they buy it to the time they sell it, or the time you sell it. So 6 months. Well, couple things you got to cover for 6 months. You have to cover utilities for that property. You have to cover insurance. You have to cover taxes. You have to cover, lawn care, maintenance around the property and stuff like that. You have to cover, I mentioned utilities, but there's a variety of things that you have to cover during that period of 6 months that add up. And they add up a lot. Like when you do the math on that, it could be another $10,000 of holding cost. And that's, for that type of project is pretty accurate, pretty fair number to use. The other thing is, if you're selling it for $300,000 and assuming you're not a realtor, so you have to use a realtor, you're going to list that on the market, that realtor's in most cases going to charge 5 to 6%. So we'll be nice and use 5%. So 5% of $300,000 is $15,000. Okay. So now in that example that you looked at it on the surface and thought that you were going to make $50,000 profit, well, you got $10,000 going to holding cost. You got $15,000 going that has to be backed out for a realtor. So now $50,000 becomes $25,000, and still a profit, but you're decreasing that margin of error, right? So this is very important when you're flipping a house, is to factor in all of those costs, right? So what we do when we underwrite a deal, we're going to make some estimates. And some of these, these are very accurate estimates, right? They're estimates because you can't know down to the penny what everything's going to cost. But in this example, we would look at it, figuring out to determine our max allowable offer. We're going to look at, okay, it's 300,000 ARV. We've comped that out, like we've pulled comps in the area, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But we're going to use that number, $300,000. Okay. We get a contractor in there, looks over everything and says it's going to cost you $50,000 to fix it. Okay. So we back that out. Now we're at, $250,000. Well, let's say our goal in this deal is to make $50,000. Okay. Well, if that's as far as I've gotten, I'm buying ARV 300, backing out 50 for repairs or rehab. If my goal is to make $50,000 profit and I just stop right there, then my max allowable offer on the surface is $200,000. But I know I have to factor in holding costs, closing costs, and realtor costs. So now when I start backing that out, now I'm down to $200,000 because I want to make 50. Now I got to subtract out 15 from my realtor, 10 for my holding cost, and let's call it another 10 for closing cost on front and back end. So I'm just using easy math here. So that's an additional $35,000 that I need to account for before in order to get to my $50,000 profit goal. So if that's the case, I'm at $200,000 now. I need to back out $35,000. All right. So now I'm at 165,000 is the most I can pay for this property in order to hit my $50,000 target. Okay. And by doing it that way, you're building in enough, you're accounting for everything that you know is going to come up, but then you got enough buffer to cover the unknowns, right? So the unknowns could be you get into the rehab and start ripping walls out or whatever you're doing and realize, oh, here's an additional $5,000 I have to spend to, maybe it's a foundation issue or something like that. But I've got enough buffer because I underwrote it well enough to know that I can account or handle that. And instead of 50, I might make 45, right? So you're also accounting for by being very conservative in your underwriting, you're also accounting for things like maybe the ARV is a little bit off, right? So instead of 300,000, it ends up selling for 290. Well, in that case, instead of making 50, I'm making 40, right? But I had enough buffer in there where it still remains profitable and it accounts for that potential. Or let's say instead of 50,000 for repairs, I ran into some issues. We went over a little bit in some areas, and now I'm at 65,000, right? So now instead of 50,000 profit, I'm making 35. Still making a good profit because I accounted for all these things. It can go the other way too. You get into the repairs, and let's say, you're able to figure out some creative ways to not compromise on value, but maybe you do it for 40,000 and maybe it sells for 310,000. So now you've added $20,000 to your profit. So instead of making 50, you make 70. That happens pretty often as well. That's less often than missing the numbers on the other way. But it does happen. So the main thing to know with all those numbers is you want to account for everything, and even the micro things that you're not thinking about, the holding costs, the real estate commissions, things like that. So make sure you factor that in and back into that max allowable offer, accounting for those things. So now, how to figure out ARV, right? So that a lot of folks kind of have this misconception that they have to contact a realtor to have that realtor run comps for them in order to, know what the ARV is. With services these days like Zillow and Redfin and Realtor.com and Trulia and, things like that, there's a whole bunch of sites you can go on, type in the address of the exact property you're looking for. And in that, once you type it in and search it, it's going to pull up that property. And most of those sites are going to pull up right below it comps. So comparable sales. They're going to show everything that their database can find that has sold that's comparable in size and details, square footage and number of bed, bath, and stuff like that in that general area. So let's say I'm buying a house in Newport News, Virginia, right? So I can plug in the address, and let's say in the last 3 months, 10 houses within 3 blocks of that house have sold that are comparable size and details. Well, now I can look at those right on that website and see exactly what they sold for. Now, a realtor, that they can run a comparative market analysis, a CMA is what it's called, and they can really dial that in even better. But this is a good starting point to determine ARV. Now, there's some nuance here. I mentioned Newport News. If you're buying in a city that has a lot of real estate transactions, on a weekly basis, it's not going to be hard to find comps and figure out what your ARV should be projected at. But there's a lot of cases where, like where I live in Surrey, Virginia, where there may not be a lot of comps available, right? So like I might be buying something in a very rural acre that has 5 acres with it, and there hadn't been a house sold within 20 miles of this house in the last 2 years, right? So, and that's very real. That could happen. So it's very important in those situations to then work with a realtor to determine what they really think and that can be a little, there's a lot of variables in there that, could come up to make that number wrong. So what we like to do when we have unique situations like that, where it might be a unique property that there's not a lot of properties like it, or it might be in a unique location where there's not a lot of comparable sales recently in that area, we get super conservative. So, and then just to give you a quick example, let's say I'm buying a property out in the country in Surrey. It's a very rural area, nothing around it but fields and cows, and just really no comparable sales to compare it to. So what I might do is go to a realtor, and I know obviously I've been in Surrey my whole life, so I've got a very good network of realtors. But I can go to them and say, "Hey guys, looking at this property, what do you think it could sell for if I fix it all up?" And let's say they say $300,000. Well, because there's not a lot of comparable sales to compare that to, or to compare the value to, because nothing's sold comparable to that, then what I would do is I'd take that 300 and I'm going to use 250 as my ARV. I'm really going to go super conservative. So I might back into my offer much less than I would if it truly came in at 300. I might use 250, back into it for that, and then hope that it does sell for 300 so I can make, even more profit. But I'm hedging that risk of and mitigating that risk of it not selling for 300 and actually selling for 250 or 240 or something like that. So that's how we handle those. Another situation might be, I mentioned Newport News, Virginia. Well, there's different areas of Newport News, right? There's some areas that are, heavier in crime. The school systems might not be as desirable, or it might, the neighborhood might not be in the best of situations, or whatever the case may be. But you can go a half a mile down the street and that crosses over into a new school system. It may cross over into better neighborhoods with maybe better HOAs, or whatever the case may be. And just a half mile difference could mean the difference of 20 to 30% in ARV. So when you're running comps, you don't want, or comparables, you don't want to compare apples and oranges. You want to get as close to apples as you can. So that's just another thing to consider. And again, if you're not comfortable pulling your own comps and ARV, work with a realtor, because at the end of all of this, you're going to end up selling this house, right? So you're going to need a realtor to sell it for you, to list it for you if you go that route, and assuming you're not a realtor yourself. If you are a realtor, you should have no problem running ARVs. But don't hesitate to work with a realtor to come up with comps and stuff if you're not too comfortable doing it. All right. So you've come up with your ARV, you've gotten into your max allowable offer based off what your early projections are on rehab. Now, I want to talk about rehab a little bit. And this is where I think a lot of folks miss the mark when it comes to flipping houses, is they're trying to estimate without much experience. They're trying to estimate rehab on their own, right? So they'll walk into a house, they're doing a typical walkthrough. They're going to walk into every room. They're going to look at the kitchen and they're going to think, oh, I need a new kitchen. That's 15 grand. Oh, I need a new bathroom. That's 5 grand. Need a new roof. That's 10 grand. I'm just throwing random numbers out. So they do that quick analysis, but what they may be missing is, oh, we get into this kitchen and the whole entire floor under the sink has had a leak, and I didn't recognize that it was soft. And now I got another, instead of 15 grand, I might be looking at 23 grand for this kitchen, because I got to, mitigate all the floor issues, or the roof. You look at it and you've heard that this size roof should cost $10,000 to take the old shingles off, put new shingles on. Now you project that. Now you get a roofer in there to actually do the job after you've bought it. They pull all the shingles off and they see that there is a lot of rot and just all the stuff underneath it needs to be replaced, right? So now a 10,000 roof becomes a $13,000 to $15,000 roof. Same thing underneath. You may have peeked underneath with a flashlight, seen no issues, but now you get in there and contractor gets under there and there's termite damage everywhere, or there might be rotted joists that they have to replace, or sister joists and stuff like that. So there's a lot of variables that can come up if you're trying to do this on your own without contractor experience. So my recommendation, if you fall in that category, have a contractor that you know and trust. And if you don't have one, reach out to your network and find one that does work with these types of houses in this area, and have them walk the property with you. We have a contractor look at just about every property we buy, unless it's a very clean, easy, newer house that we can do. But we want their budget, their scope of work, and then that's what we use for our ultimate number for repairs. So highly encourage you to, if you're going to look at a house to fix and flip, take the contractor in there with you. Have them use their expertise to give you, they're going to notice things that you don't notice. They're going to notice the, the behind the gutters, there's some rotted soffit or fascia board, and they're going to know that that's going to be something you need to factor in that you might not have noticed and ended up getting burned on later. So always, if you're not a contractor yourself, or if you haven't, we flip a pile of houses, and we've bought and fixed up, a pile of houses, and we underwrite a pile of houses for our lending business, but we still rely on contractors to make sure they're covering everything. So get your, that's where, you can miss out on thousands, tens of thousands of dollars of work by not properly underwriting the scope of work and stuff like that. Another common mistake, again, going back to the ARV, is overestimating the ARV, right? So everybody getting into this, you're like, and I'm the world's worst at it. I want every deal to work, and I try to make it work any way I can. So by that, I mean, I might see comparable sales that are saying 300, but I want this deal to work so bad. I can convince myself that we can sell it for 315,000 because we can go in and make it the best looking house on the block and blah, blah, blah. So I do that, and I don't anymore, but early on I did this. But a lot of folks will do that and convince themselves that they can make this a better deal than what it is on the surface, and then they get burned that way. Again, underestimating repairs, that's a big one. Ignoring holding costs. And then at the end of the day, just making emotional decisions. I said it earlier, I was guilty early on, and still to some degree. This is why I don't do a lot of the underwriting and loan originations for our lending company, because I think I always look through the lens of, I can make this a good deal, right? I can justify buying this deal or lending on this deal. And that's all emotions, because I want to make it work, right? Like, that's just who I am. I'm a very positive, glass always full, we can figure this out type situation. But you got to remove all that when it comes to flipping houses. So to kind of summarize all this, and before I do that, let me run through like a real example. I've kind of tossed these numbers out there, but I want to run through a real example of from start to finish. Okay. So let's say we are made aware of a house on 123 Main Street, Newport News, Virginia. I use that because that's like our main market, Newport News, Hampton, the peninsula of Virginia. So 123 Main Street. Somebody brings that to me, and now I'm going to start to figure out if this is something I want to offer on. First thing I do, I go on to, let's call it Realtor.com, and I'm going to go to a couple of the different sites to see if I'm going to go to Zillow and Redfin and things like that. And I plug in the address, and I see a very consistent, comparable sale of $300,000 for this type of house. Let's say it's 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square feet, and consistently I'm seeing anywhere from $290 to $315. Okay, so I'm comfortable knowing that the house I'm looking at 123 Main Street can sell for $300,000. So we use that as the ARV. Now, next thing I'm gonna do is, whoever I'm buying it from, say, hey, can I get into the house? And can me and the contractor get into the house? If the answer is yes, they let us in. I'm going to meet my contractor, or in our case, we've worked with the same contractor for years and years, so we trust them to go in there without us, give us full scope of work, budget, everything. So, but assuming that's not the case, I would meet them there, and I'd walk through with that contractor, telling them what I want this house to look like before I put it back on the market. And then they go through with their pen and pad or their iPad, taking videos, doing whatever. And within a day or two, they're going to, and sometimes right there on the spot, they're going to give me an estimate to do all the things that need to be done. And I'm going to have them go under the house. I'm going to have them do everything. Go into the attic, look at every inch of that house. And let's say that comes back at $50,000. So I know it's going to cost $50,000 to get this to the point I can sell it to $300,000. So if I'm using my earlier formula of I'm going to take the ARV times 70%, okay? So that's 210. I got 50,000 in repairs. That's 160. Right there is my max allowable offer, not considering anything else. But that's not my max allowable offer because I have to factor in closing cost. All right. So right now we're at 160 on this particular example. So now I need to factor in my closing costs, and I'm going to call that, let's say I'm just covering the front end and my back end. I'm not covering seller's closing costs. So let's say $5,000. All right. I'm going to have, excuse me, a realtor commission. That's going to be $15,000 on the back end. And I'm going to have holding cost of, let's call it $10,000. So that's $30,000 more that I need to account for. So now I'm going to take that, what I was at 160, and I'm dropping that back to 130. So 130 is the max I can pay for this house to make it hit all the numbers I need it to hit. So, and with that leaves me with a projected profit of $50,000. So now I go back to the seller or the wholesaler or the realtor, whoever I'm working with to negotiate this deal, and I'll make an offer. Now, this is where, and we can do a whole nother episode on like negotiation tactics and stuff like that. But I know I can pay up to 130 on this house based off the numbers. I also know that whatever I offer, whoever's selling it, in most cases are going to want to negotiate with me, right? So having that in mind, I know I probably should make my first offer, giving myself a little bit of wiggle room to negotiate with the seller. And in most cases, this is just negotiation 101. If I say 130 out of the gate, they're going to say 150. We're going to meet at 140, right? It's just some middle ground. So if I know my max is 130, then I'm going to probably come out of the gate at 120. They might say 140, and we're going to meet at 130, and I get it at my max allowable offer. So then we close on it. I implement all the other strategies, and because this episode is just about underwriting, we're going to stop right there with that. So that is, in summary, I'm going to summarize it real quick. You find a deal, you analyze that deal, you're trying to get comps and determine the after repair value. You meet a contractor, you determine what the repairs are going to be. You calculate for your construction, your holding costs, your commissions, all of those things, and then you determine that max allowable offer. And then you make your offer, you execute on all of your plan, you sell it, and you make your profit. So that is underwriting a fix and flip property 101. A lot of nuance in there, and I encourage everybody to, like, if you're interested in just getting into this, I'm happy to talk to you further or just do some further research. But this gives you kind of a very quick example or outline of how you would underwrite a deal to get started in this. So the next part of this is mindset, right? So all of this, to implement this strategy and underwriting and all that stuff, you got to have a proper mindset to do so. So I'm going to transition into a mindset topic that ties into this. But before we do that, here's a word from our sponsor, 608B Capital. If you've been following this podcast for any time now, you have certainly heard us talk about 608B Capital. 608B Capital is our lending company that Bill Phillips and I launched about a little over 2 years ago. And we fund folks that are buying houses, fixing them up, and then ultimately selling them or refinancing them for longer term use. And we're the short term financing for that. So if you have anyone in your network or you yourself are into that business or interested in learning more, you can reach out to us by checking out our website, 608bcapital.com. We always have plenty of capital to lend, and we're excited to work with as many new people as possible. We also have an excellent referral program, so contact us for more information on that, and we can't wait to hear from you. All right, so now we're moving on to our mindset segment, and today's nugget is going to be on discipline. So the hardest part when it comes to underwriting or doing fix and flip and underwriting for fix and flips is what I touched on earlier, the emotions that go into it. When you're getting started out, and I know I was this way, I wanted to do every deal that came on my plate. So I would look at them and I would try to convince myself, rather than now I look at it, and thankfully I have a good business partner that does this with every deal. But now I have the mentality of I'm trying to kill the deal. You'll hear that a lot thrown around in real estate circles. Killing the deal means I'm trying to poke every hole I can in it during underwriting to make this not work. And if I can't do that, then it's probably a good deal, right? So where discipline comes in is everything I laid out about above is it starts with your goal. What's your goal? What's your profit goal? That could be a number or a percentage or whatever you want. You got to define that for yourself. But what's the goal? And then what are your underwriting steps that you're going to adhere to? So all the steps I just went through, you can, they vary from person to person, how they analyze things, but you need to set those guidelines and these check boxes in stone, right? You're not going to sway from these. And what does it take to do that and consistently do that? That's discipline. So, and when it comes to underwriting, sticking to your max allowable offer. So in that example I gave earlier, we ended up with $130,000 offer I can make, right? So let's say they come back and say, oh, I can't take any more than 160. Well, if I'm already at 130 and I'm staying disciplined, I'm walking. I'm saying it's 130 or I'm moving on to the next deal. That's hard to do when you're trying to get deals done. But somebody without discipline might say, well, I can push it up to 140. And they might come back, like now you've convinced yourself that 140 you can make it work. And they say, I can't take any less than 145. Well, I'm already at 140. I can push it up to 145. Now you're $15,000 in the hole compared to what your original goal was. So lack of discipline has compromised you a little bit when it comes to risk. So discipline means sticking to your guns, right? Do not step over. Like if your max allowable offer is 130, that's your max allowable offer. Not 135, not 133, it's 130. So if you need to factor in some wiggle room there, you start lower than that, like I said earlier, and then work up to that 130 number, and that is it. So discipline matters. So discipline matters not just in this example, it matters in business, in fitness, in life. Everything requires a foundation of discipline, right? So, I talk about motivation a lot, right? But motivation, it is fleeting, right? You can be motivated to want to get into the fix and flip game and underwrite every deal that comes, across your plate. And you can be motivated to buy every deal and to build an empire and all this stuff in real estate. But discipline and doing the things that you set out to do under a very specific structure, that is what ultimately is going to lead to success. In business, you develop systems, and I'll use our business at 608B Capital. We have very robust systems that we follow for every loan we make, right? All the way from the intake of that loan to the funding of that loan to the rehab draws to the eventual payoff where they pay us back. It is very systematic. The only way that we're successful is being very disciplined with those systems. When we sway outside of those systems, or if we were to sway outside of those systems, it opens up a lot more risk. So discipline is key in business in setting up and implementing your systems. So if, like for me, I'm a very disciplined person with certain aspects of my life. I'm also a very ADD person, right? So I find it difficult in general to stick to systems and processes, right? In business. Now, when it comes to other areas of my life, my behaviors, my fitness and, things like that, trying to learn and my curiosity, I'm very disciplined with things like that. But when it comes to structure and systems and stuff like that in business, I'm not very good at it. So what do? I surround myself with people, whether it's partners or employees or mentors that are very disciplined, and they can kind of fill that void for me. So whether you're that way yourself or you need to surround yourself with people, you've got to figure out how to implement these disciplined systems and process into your business, into your underwriting of deals, stuff like that. And when it comes to fitness, which is, in fitness, I'm talking about the physical fitness, working out, exercise, and then also your nutrition. All of that requires discipline. How many people, and probably a lot of you listen, go through these roller coasters of lose 20 pounds and I gain it right back. Now lose 20 pounds and I gain it right back. That's because you're not disciplined. That's all it is to it. You're not disciplined in that area. So you're operating off motivation. You get, you get to a point where you're 30 pounds heavier than you feel like you should be. So you get motivated to lose that weight because maybe you saw yourself in the mirror, or you heard a video, or somebody said something to you. And now you get down to 160. Now you're at a good point again because you were motivated. And then boom, you let go of all that motivation because you got to your goal. And now you're headed right back up to wherever you were, 190 again. And I'm saying this because that's the range of weight that, like, when I go off the rails, I get up higher in weight. And then when I get, I don't do this very much anymore because I have implemented discipline, but a lot of people follow these same patterns when it comes to fitness and nutrition. They get motivated, but they're not disciplined. Discipline is what sustains long-term success in this area, whether it's fitness, nutrition, health, and then back to business. And then in life in general, a disciplined person, when you can show discipline in all areas of your life or most areas of your life, you build a reputation of somebody who is reliable because of your discipline. You are trustworthy for the most part, right? Some people can be disciplined in certain areas, but absolute, just the most untrustworthy people on the planet. But for the most part, if you can be disciplined, you in most areas of your life, people are going to trust that because they see that discipline. They see the action that you're taking because of discipline. And I mean, I think of discipline as like the glue to all of my success, right? And the successful people that I surround myself with and I observe, whether I know them or not, all have rock solid discipline in most areas of their life, right? Now, there may be some unhealthy people that are very disciplined in business, and that happens, right? That happens a lot. There may be some very healthy and fit people that are a train wreck when it comes to their business and finances and stuff like that. That can happen as well. But for the most part, most quote unquote successful people have a above average level of discipline in most areas of their life. So as I wrap this up, I'm going to kind of, again, talking about underwriting a fix and flip property. I've gone through that, talked about the discipline that goes along with this. And as we wrap it up, like, if this has helped you, share it with another potential investor or somebody that has a business and they want to hear the discipline piece. But it helps us as a growing podcast and to get this word out. Because like I said in the beginning of this, you may not be someone who is into real estate or fixing and flipping houses. You may not even have a business. You may, whatever the case may be. But the discipline piece of this you can benefit from. But you certainly know somebody in your life that is into real estate or thinking about it that might not know where to start. And this could be just a little piece of the pie that could get them started and down the right path. So with that, we'll wrap up another episode of Burning the Ships solo. And until next time, stay disciplined, stay focused, and keep burning the ships. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Burning the Ships podcast. As always, we want to thank our sponsor, 608B Capital. We are a short-term lending fund, a debt fund, open for investors who are looking for a passive return. And also we offer products to our main product to fix and flippers and buy and holders, folks that are doing things like that in real estate. Also want to remind you about our referral program. Check out our website for more information on that, and we're happy to talk to you further if you're interested. Again, thank you for joining us on Burning the Ships, and do me a favor and go out and try to find someone or some way that you can add value into the world today. Think through it, zoom out, and try to find where you can add value. I think it'll help wrap up your day, wrap up your week, whatever you're working on a positive note if you constantly think that way. Where can I add value? So with that, we thank you for joining us on another episode of Burning the Ships. Have a good one.